Working in a toxic workplace can take a toll on your mental health and even your relationships. Today, I'm going to help you look at it from a different angle. And I promise I'm going to teach you how to transform that experience, that it's actually in a doorway to liberating yourself. Maybe some of you have already left a toxic workplace situation, and my video today is going to help you see if you learned all the lessons that it was supposed to teach you about your sense of power over your life. So, what do I mean by a toxic workplace? Well, it's a work situation that really harms your mental health instead of contributing to it. And there are a lot of different ways or, ways that manifests for you. It might be that it's just not a match for who you are and your strengths, but there is a type of toxic workplace that really is more emotional. So I'm going to start with a story from my own life. And this is about 25 years ago. So I think I'm about 35. And I get this job for a nonprofit. And I think it's my lifelong job that I'm going to retire. It's my passion. And within a couple of weeks of being hired, I start to get really insecure because I wonder, like, why did they hire me? And it was really interesting because along the way, as I did my work for for this nonprofit, the community was really not only supportive, but was affirming I was doing a great job. And yet inside this organization, the board members that I worked for, I just continued to feel more and more insecure. And I stayed for 2 years. And now I wonder, why did I stay that long when I felt like I really wasn't a match? But that had to do with my own sort of pattern of needing to prove that I could fix it, that I could figure it out. And by the end of the 2 years, I went to the my boss and said that it really wasn't working out. And I found out that all along they were trying to find a way to fire me. So it was a terrible experience. And when I left, I quickly got over the feeling of, that I had failed. And I started looking forward. But what was interesting is about 2 weeks after I was in a coffee shop, and one of my colleagues out in the community that had really appreciated my work said I was glowing. And it was in that moment that I learned the lesson, which was don't stay in a situation where I don't feel good about myself. But why did I stay? That was complicated. So we'll get to that later. Well, today, the idea of toxic workplace is really taking hold. I think it's more common than we think. We've always known that 85% of people leave their job because of their manager and their boss, and that's a kind of, toxic workplace. That authority figure having power over you. But some of my clients actually, their workplace is so strikingly abusive that they are almost like abused wives that can't find a way to leave the situation. And it's really interesting. So, this is why I wanted to do this video today. So, here's a couple of scenarios that maybe you can identify with. Nonprofits. Nonprofits can be toxic not for the same reason as a for-profit company, because typically when you work for a nonprofit, you really appreciate the mission. And a lot of people have a hard time leaving a nonprofit when they're not happy there because they really were committed to the mission. So often in a nonprofit, the toxic aspect of the culture happens because there's a scarcity mentality. And especially during times of like societal chaos and, downward economics, that pressure to fund the mission of the nonprofit really causes people in the organization to feel like there's not enough. There's not enough time, there's not enough money. And what happens collectively is that that's perceived as a threat. And so people start kind of attacking each other because they don't know where to put that stress. And often when I bring this up to the people in a nonprofit, they immediately are like, oh my gosh, we should be working together out of a sense of confidence about what we're doing, not in that scarce mentality. So a nonprofit is a typical toxic work environment because of the scarcity. In late stage capitalism, which is where we are, the toxicity can occur because there's this extreme form of competition. For example, in the AI field, where these investors, the investor class, are trying to get in there and grab market share ASAP, and they're willing to do it in unethical ways. So a lot of the toxicity comes from employees being pressured to leave behind integrity and their morality and ethics. And because of the pressure, even of the higher your bosses, that pressure can then lead to belligerent behavior and really emotionally abusive behavior. And what happens is sometimes when you work in that environment, you've adapted to it over time, and you'll keep being pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to see how much will you take, how far will you go, until you eventually reach a breaking point. So these are a couple of different scenarios, and maybe you find yourself in one or other of these. So, in the end, what happens is that you, as the worker, have a sense of powerlessness. So, you have been just sort of emotionally beat up, and then you end up either being so exhausted, you don't know how to fight it. So, some of my clients are like, I know I need to find another job, but I'm so exhausted. I'm too exhausted. I can't even think about like having to send my resume to 30 people or 30 companies. And then you may internalize and you suffer. And so it might turn into a health concern or gained weight or, your jaw hurts all night or you get migraine headaches. So now we want to blame the leaders, right? The leaders of these companies, but there's a larger thing happening, right? There's a lot of chaos. In fact, our very government systems they're being dismantled and we don't know what's going to take their place. And so, it's hard for even leaders to set the tone. And they're not equipped to deal with the complexity of what's going on psychologically because the individual psychology is mixing with the group psychology of not only the company, but the whole collective. And that gets pretty complicated. And also during times of stress, the reactions that maybe were sort of right below the surface, they get triggered. And so people also are more easily triggered. In fact, Carl Jung, one of the founders of depth psychology, the study of the unconscious, that's my expertise, said that the psyche of a group can become that of a wild animal. And so then the group takes on an identity that is more than just combining a bunch of individual psyches together. So this is what happened during World War II and Nazism. And, how we wonder how do individuals become part of a group that they end up doing things that they said that they would never do in their lives. So, and at the same time, the way out of this mess in the toxic workplace is you, the individual. So I'm driven by Jung's suggestion that the fate of humanity, or you could say the fate of your work culture, is really depends upon the self-reflecting individual. And what does that mean? It means self-knowledge. So this is how you take your power back and you become empowered. So, what I want to do in this video is I want to get you looking at this from a different angle. And my goal is to flip your sense of victim consciousness and your sense of powerlessness into power through self-awareness. And if you can do that, then you can see the situation more clearly and act out of your executive function part of your brain rather than your reptile part of your brain, which is thinking that the situation is like a rattlesnake about to bite you instead of it's just a thing. It's a bunch of humans and I'm at a workplace. So that's what I want to do today. And the first concept I want to talk about, I've covered in another video, and it's something that will get you thinking about how complex this is and appreciate it. So, between you and one other person, so let's say it's you and your boss, there's four conversations happening. There's four pathways of communication. And one is between your conscious awareness. So, you're having a conversation with your boss and you're aware of very little of what's being communicated, but you're aware and you're like, okay, I understand what my boss is saying. I don't like it, or I do like it because they said something nice about me. Here's what I think they mean by what they say. And so there's this conscious to conscious part of the communication. But your unconscious is absorbing a lot more than you're aware of. It's absorbing body language of your boss. It's absorbing the energy of your boss. It's absorbing sort of the little subtleties, the things that are being communicated between the words and between the sentences and during the sighs, etc. Hello there. My cat, Professor Langley, wants to be in on this video, I suppose. And then, so that's each way. And then the most communication is happening between your unconscious. And this is where our unconscious can pick up on things in the other person's unconscious. And we might be triggered by something that we're not even aware of. So that's the first part to realize. So that's only between you and your boss. Now, when you are with a group, and let's say there are, 5 people in your department, now multiply that. So that's why all of this stuff in the unconscious can end up contributing to the identity of the group. It's also um, why we have this concept of the tipping point in a group and how to change the sort of the essence of the group. If there's about a third of the people who have a certain kind of energy, they can tip the group in either a negative way or a positive way. And that's I think that's oh, I forget the author of that book, The Tipping Point. So okay, so that's the first concept. Now, the second concept, and right away, you're already going to have more power when you understand this, is that when there's a situation that happens, for example, a lot of us have an authority complex. So when we get an email from our boss that says, "Would you please come into my office?" Some of us are like, "What did I do wrong?" And our heart starts to beat and we start to sweat and we feel fear. And honestly, what is that about, right? So already we're going into the boss's office, not able to see clearly or even really listen to what they want to communicate because that is a triggering event for some of us. So the emotion is not about the boss, but it ends up sort of coding over the actual situation, and you're bringing that fear. So therefore, you're going to respond to the whole situation in a defensive way. So that's a very easy example for you to understand. But when you have a situation with another person and it upsets you more than just mild annoyance, right? So, somebody said something and it was rude and you're like, well, that's rude. Why would you do that? That's fine. There's nothing happening there. But if you suddenly have this negative emotional reaction and you become quite righteous about how rude they are, then there's something very old at play, and you're not seeing the situation clearly at all. And so that is getting in the way. So that's another concept. Now we can bring in neuroscience here. So our brain has a reticular activating system. And what happens is it scans the environment because we can't be aware of all the stimulus all around us. In fact, scientists say we only see 1% of reality. So, what determines what you see? And it is your assumptions and beliefs. And most of our assumptions and beliefs are in our unconscious. We just aren't aware of them. Even for every belief that we say, well, I believe this, there's probably 8 other sort of beliefs and different variations of assumptions that you're not conscious of. So, what your brain does, whether you say, I believe this is possible. Okay, I believe this is possible. As soon as you say that, your reticular activating system tries to make that true, and it looks for evidence of that is true. Now, that conscious belief of, I believe I can do this, this is possible, might be undermined by an unconscious limiting belief. And so this is the case where we end up sabotaging ourselves, and we're not sabotaging ourselves. It's just that our conscious belief is being undermined by a belief that is in competition with that belief or that value. So, when we are triggered and there's this old thing that's showing up, just think about it. Now your brain's reticular activating system is looking for evidence that you really are in danger. So now you're really accidentally blowing things out of proportion. Now, I might have mentioned complex, so I mentioned triggering. So what and there's a lot of talk about trauma, but a lot of people don't like that language. So we don't have to look at it that way. There is research on what we call adverse childhood experiences. We all have them. I mean, we need to. This is what shapes our ability to be able to go out into the world, right? And be functioning adults. So, but as a child, we don't have consciousness. We can't self reflect. We live in the now, we live in the moment. So, if something negative happens to us in childhood, it's felt in the body, but it's not reflected upon, right? Or we might say, Mom, so and so said this and hurt my feelings. And then the parent might help you actually process that experience. But in many cases, all throughout the day, we have these negative experiences that are felt in the body. They're not reflected upon. But what happens is that we naturally, instinctually, intuitively sort of try to avoid a situation that caused us to be hurt, or we try to replicate a situation where we felt loved and we feel belonging. Now, we're not reflecting upon this. So that works to protect us over time. But also over time, it might mean that then we avoid situations that, would cause us to grow. And then eventually we have these irrational feeling or irrational fears of certain things, or we become over attached to something that makes us feel a sense of belonging. And then we become dependent on our partner for a sense of love, right? So you can see over time, something that started as a very simple reaction to either avoid pain or pursue pleasure can become an entrenched pattern that gets in the way and we can't see things clearly and we also limit ourselves and then sometimes we can't even get out of a situation. So that's all that's happening. So we don't have to have experienced trauma. This just is how we live. Okay. So what do we do about this? So now we are in a toxic work situation. What do we do? Well, the best place to start is to debrief. Go back and analyze a negative situation. So let's say you have a pattern of like you feel undermined by your coworkers. You just, wherever you go, you walk into the room and you just feel it. Now, the first thing to do is to detangle two pieces of the incident. It could be objectively true that there is a coworker that is positioning themselves and they are undermining you. That could objectively be true. At the same time, your emotional reaction to it is not about that situation. The emotion you're bringing to it is old. So that's the first thing to do is in your journaling, go, okay, what objectively happened? I walked in, this person looked at me like this, and this person said this when I said this. Just write it all down. Don't put any meaning to it though, just their data points. This person said this. There's no meaning to that until you give it meaning, right? And then journal about your emotional reaction. Immediately, my cheeks grew red and I was embarrassed and my heart started pounding and I grew angry. Whatever it was, write all of that down and then also see if you can remember where it was in your body. Was it your heart? Was it your mouth got dry? Was it your jaw clenched? Because we can also attach this to the chakras and find out, does this have to do with your ability to advocate or does it have to do with your ability to whatever? Well, that will come later. So then, now that you've done that, then slip back into the experience, the emotion part of it, and lean into it. So as you remember feeling undermined by the freaking coworker, slip back into it and then ask yourself this question. What is my earliest memory of feeling this exact way? And don't pressure yourself, but the memory will come. Now, in the beginning, it might be, well, last month, right? So that's as far back as I can go is this same person, same incident. Okay, write that down. What is your earlier memory? Yeah, my last job. And then that gets you thinking every job, it is the same thing. Everywhere I go, people are undermining me. Now you can start to see, oh, it can't be everybody else. What's happening here? Now, eventually, you'll get to the earliest memory, which is likely when you were 8 in middle school or high school when something dramatic happened. And allow that memory to come up and feel the feeling of being undermined. And likely it was by an authority figure. So as a child, we consider the power of adults to be God-like. So it can really, really be imprinted in our body. Now, let's say you find it and you're like, oh my God, that's it. I am acting like an 8-year-old in this situation. Oh my gosh. So then name it. Okay, what is that? So I have a complex. A complex is just these patterns, and I call it a fear of being trapped complex. So I can easily feel like I'm trapped in somebody's idea, or for example, I actually don't do very well working in any work culture because I can easily just feel like people are trying to change me. So I'm an entrepreneur, so that's how I deal with that. But I name it. It's my feeling trapped complex. So name it and be curious about it. Now, notice. So the next step is notice that when you identify the root of this emotional reaction, right there, you've released something because you shined a light on it and you've integrated this part of yourself that you've forgotten about. The reason it keeps being triggered is because you've forgotten about it and you don't like that part of yourself. So it's very tricksterish. Hermes, the trickster, is putting you in these situations so that you can overcome this. So notice the possible release and then see if you can go back and look at this coworker differently. Now, again, objectively, they've got their own issues, right, that are mixing with yours. And maybe there's a mutual triggering going on, and that's for another video. But see if you can see what's going on, that when they say this certain thing or the certain situation, they are a symbol as a reminder of something old that wants to be released. So you might actually be able to look at them in a more neutral way where they don't have so much power over your emotions. You might get an idea. You might get an idea for how to solve this or how to get back at them, how to position yourself now to compete with them instead of feeling like a victim and powerless. And then also notice your body. Um, because the other thing is your central nervous system. So now this is the neuroscience that we can connect to the psychology part of it. Your central nervous system doesn't like change. So you're going to have to train your body to feel safe in situations where it didn't feel safe. So that's why I want you to notice what's going on with your body. All right. So, what is the impact of this? And I know I've already taken something that sounds simple and made it complex, but that's what it is. That's what I help people with. But the impact is that over time, you will take back what you are projecting onto the situation. So what you're doing is every time that somebody says a certain thing, you perceive it to be undermining you and you put yourself in a victim position, right? So over time, you'll be able to catch yourself and go, aha, there it is. I have more power than I think I can. Ah, I even have something to say back this time. I have a comeback. Ooh, that makes me feel more powerful. And you don't have to be mean to the other person, but you can just show up and be able to be an equal with them instead of you being in an inferior position. Now what happens when you show up differently to this other person that also has a complex at work? Well, when you show up and don't feed their monster by reacting to what they say, that leaves them like, ooh, and they're not even conscious of this. Ooh, she's not playing my game. Oh, who am I going to go play with? And suddenly that person might treat you differently, magically. It's amazing, actually. And they'll go find somebody else to pick on. Or that person digs in their heels and they become more belligerent. So that is possible, but that is just, you can see the power that you just had, right? So as you take away their power to trigger you, then they have to deal with what's left because they didn't get to release their little monster. It's kind of like, children who you can tell when they come into the room and they've got this pent up energy, and some of them look for an actual fight, not because they want to fight, because it's their body's way of releasing that energy, which is why we have to teach them how to redirect that and how to release it by going to do 10 jumping jacks. Adults are really the same way. So, okay. So the impact is that you literally have the power to shift other people and to shift the dynamic in your work culture. Now, that's aside from the fact of whether you should leave. So that's another issue because you really can't control a whole work culture. So you could be part of like a turnaround, but that's not your job, actually. It's your job to just show up and be in a place where you can blossom and do your mission, your dharma in life. And that may not be that place, or this might be the deeper meaning of this is that you actually emerge as the new leader of the organization. Who knows? We never know. So, okay, so what can you do from here? Let me give you some practical things to do. I kind of have already, but number one is be curious. So, you're interesting. And your emotional reactions are interesting and they have a deeper meaning. And you're supposed to be learning something and building a capacity that's going to allow you to grow into your ultimate purpose in life. So be curious and be nice to yourself and be self compassionate. All of your emotional reactions and all of your decisions during your whole life make perfect sense when you understand your psychology. Then you have the power to decide to choose. Well, I want to be different, but you have to accept those parts of you that have gotten you where you are. They're what make you where you are, and they're the foundation for you to grow. Number two, debrief all of your negative experiences, whether it's a fight with your partner, your children, a coworker, or it's just something that you reacted really negatively to. It could be sadness too, and you're like, wow, what's happening here? Debrief and try to do this detangling. Here's the situation that could be objectively, yeah, that sucked. Or I don't know. Why am I so upset about it? Right. And then your emotional reaction. And then do what I suggested, which is like lean into it, slip back into it. What's my earliest memory? See if you can find the root of your emotional reaction. And just start your day with an affirmation. I choose to see the truth in the situation today. Or I can look at this from a different angle. And so, what we're trying to do is not make excuses for other people's bad behavior. Sometimes people think they're letting people off the hook. No, you're about empowering yourself. Period. That's what we're going for. And then notice how things change around you. Now, if you get to the point where after some of the self-reflection and journaling, you want to address this with the person, ooh, that's my specialty. So you could schedule a session with me and I will help you use my tool, which is my proprietary version of a principle from Start with Heart or from Crucial Conversations called Start with Heart. So I took that and I adapted it to my own tool, and it works like magic. It actually is. My clients who have the courage to do it, to try it, are always pleasantly surprised by how the conversation goes. So, I also did a video on how to use that tool. So in the description, I'm going to include a link to the tool, the template, a link to that other video about using that tool, and I don't know what else. I've got so much free content that you can check out, but that's all I wanted to share today. I hope this is really useful. And oh, and subscribe to deborahlukovich.com. Like I said, I have a lot of free content. I have conversations and videos, my podcast, my blog posts, and I've got books and everything. So that's it. Take care. Hope this is helpful, and we'll see you next time.